Welcome to the Teapot Reads. I'm the Teapot. My name's Sam. I'm currently reading Crescent City Volume 2, and I am so happy to see you today. Welcome. Welcome back if you're returning, and welcome if this is your first time here. Hi, nice to meet you. So spring is so close. I don't love spring. It's definitely not my favorite season. But I always get so excited when spring comes because it's just a great new beginning point. And I love new beginnings. Creatively, I love starting things. Finishing things also feels great, but starting stuff is my favorite part of the process. That early seeding, becoming idea, becoming thing, becoming better thing. You know, it's the rough draft season. Spring is the rough draft season of your life, and I love it. It's great. It's a great season. And even though there is still some snow on the ground, the snow is melting, the air is getting warmer, the skies are getting clearer, the birds are getting louder in the morning, and I thought I would share with you, I think it's 15 books I pulled, but 15 books that remind me of spring. Some of these are books that I haven't read yet, but give off spring vibes, and I'll talk about why they give off spring vibes. And some of them are books that I have read, and I will explain why they remind me of spring. I'm sure there are more books than even these that I pulled, but these are the ones that if I distill it down, I feel like have spring essence. And I love to read in season. I love to read things that remind me of the season I'm in. I don't always manage to match it up because there is just a lot of other obligations, or I get excited for other books during one season or another. But when I can, I love to match it up. I also know that some of these books I'm going to mention don't necessarily take place during spring. That's not why they remind me of spring. The seasons in the books are irrelevant. A book can be taking place in the height of summer or the depth of winter and still be a spring book, in my opinion. So let's start with this one. Anne of Green Gables by Ella Montgomery. I have not read this book. This is high on my list of books to read this year. I hope I will be getting to it in spring. I would love to just get through this series. I know I'm going to love it. I have seen most of Anne with an E on Netflix, and I've heard that as good as that is, the original Anne of Green Gables show is even better. So what is Anne of Green Gables if you don't know? I'm just going to read from the back. When Marilla Cuthbert and her brother Matthew decide to adopt a child from a distant orphanage, they don't quite get what they bargained for. The child who awaits them at the tiny Bright River train station is not the strapping young boy they'd imagined, someone help Matthew work the fields of their small farm, but rather a freckle-faced, red-haired waif named Anne, with an E, if you please. Matthew and Marilla may not be sure about Anne, but Anne takes one look at Prince Edward Island's red clay roads and the Cuthberts' snug white farmhouse with its distinctive green gables and decides that she's home at last. But will she be able to convince Marilla and Matthew to let her stay? Armed with only a battered carpetbag and boundless imagination, Anne charms her way into the Cuthberts' hearts, and into the hearts of readers as well. This is the Tundra edition, which I believe is the Canadian edition. I love this. It's so cute. I also really like how the spine looks we have Green Gables down here. So, I'm really excited. This book, I mean, the vibes, just in general, across the board, very springtime, very let's be outside and have fun and just enjoy the outside. Very much a vibe. Also, the imagination, the wildness, the childhood. This is a childhood classic. And springtime for me, as much as it is a point of new beginnings, is also a point of return. It's a season of returning to the things that I loved as a kid and wanting to recapture that nostalgic, carefree, wondrous, imaginative part of me. And Anne is definitely a very imaginative young girl, and I think her and her story and her stories that she tells in the books, because I believe she does write and she has, like, in her imagination she'll have stories and her own little things going on. That's also just a huge point of childhood. So I'm really excited to get to this, and that is why it's a spring book for me. I have a couple different editions of Anne of Green Gables. To be honest, I keep buying it because I just know I'm going to love it, and there are so many pretty editions of these books. Let's go with another classic. So this is another one I haven't read. This is Here Be Dragons by Stella Gibbons. I actually was debating on a couple different Stella Gibbons books because in general her books give me springtime vibes. Partly it's the covers, which I love. These covers are done by Pep Montserrat. I love these. This is the Penguin Vintage edition, so the red spine. And it is lovely. Let me read the back to you real quick. When Nell Seeley moves from sleepy Dorset to Hampstead, she leaves behind a childhood of dull teas and oppressive rules for the freedom of the big city. Naive and only 19, she becomes romantically entwined with the wayward John Gaunt and falls in with London's bohemian crowd. In this city of seductive, shifting morals, smoke-filled jazz clubs, and glamorous espresso bars, Nell must master her newfound independence and learn to strike her own course. And there's a quote from the Scotsman on the back that says, "The atmosphere of the cheap cafes is subtly caught. Packed tight with wit and understanding, it lights the London scene." So, Stella Gibbons' books that I have quite a few now. I have not read one. They all seem to just burst with life. This one is about, obviously, Nell, who's a young girl setting out on her own, really gaining her independence for the first time. And she's setting off into a new life, a life she's carving for herself. And I mean, that quote from the Scotsman, I think, also really says it. It's just lights the London scene. Life is about light. It is about doing things. It is about being. It is about changing and moving forward. And no season exemplifies that more than springtime, when the rivers thaw and they start moving again, when the buds come out, when roses bloom. I don't actually know when roses bloom. I just thought it would sound poetic. But flowers are blooming. It's that time of the year. And it sounds like Nell here is going to bloom into adulthood, or at least attempt to, and sort of carve her own way and thaw her own river. So, yes, springtime read. One I've actually read, and I feel like I can make an argument that this is for any season. That is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is the Penguin Dropcaps edition, for people who are curious. I obviously love Pride and Prejudice. I'm definitely going to reread it again this season. I don't know if I'm going to read it in this edition or what edition I'll be reading it in, but I love Pride and Prejudice. It is about Elizabeth Bennet and her sisters, and there is a new bachelor who moves in to their town, and their mother has her sights set on him marrying Elizabeth's sister Jane. But there's like drama, and then obviously Darcy is a big part of this drama, and Lizzie's like, "I hate you." Darcy's like, "I hate you." But then of course they're like, "I love you." So why is it a springtime book? This book is just so fresh. I mean, partly I read it last year in the spring, and I think that kind of carved major spring vibes into it for me. But there's so much walking in this book, and so much being outside, and so much letter writing, and there's a lot of detail on the mundanity of these lives. And spring is a season of taking the time to stop and measure yourself and measure your days and just appreciate the small things in life. You know, like I just said, the buds are coming out, flowers are blooming, the birds are returning, the bugs, unfortunately, are returning. And it's these small little gestures and moments of nature that really reflect how important the small things in life are. And Pride and Prejudice, as much as it has a larger story, I think a lot of the charm and the beauty of this book are those small moments. I also, like I said, there's a lot of walking, and I associate walking and just, again, being outside, being in nature with springtime. Let's do a nonfiction. So, Late Migrations by Margaret Renkl. So the full title is Late Migrations, A Natural History of Love and Loss. I'm just going to read to you the back, and then I'm going to show you some of the gorgeous, gorgeous art in this book. So this is a nonfiction. It is a sort of memoir, sort of nature writing. From New York Times opinion writer Margaret Renkl comes an unusual, captivating portrait of a family, and of the cycles of joy and grief that inscribe human lives within the natural world. In brief essays, Renkl traces a tender and honest portrait of her unforgettable parents and of the bittersweet moments that accompany a child's transition to caregiver. Braided into the overall narrative, she also offers observations on the world surrounding her suburban Nashville home. Ringing with rapture and heartache, these essays convey the dignity of bluebirds and rat snakes, monarch butterflies, and native bees. As the two threads haunt and harmonize with each other, Rankle suggests that there is astonishment to be found in common things, in what seems ordinary and what we all share. For in both worlds, the natural one and our own, the shadow side of love is always lost, and the grief is only love's own twin. So, I feel like kind of repeating a little bit why I think Pride and Prejudice is important as a springtime read. I mean, this talks about nature, this talks about the small things, this talks about our ties to nature. Once again, spring is a time for me to be outside and to enjoy the outside. I'm not a big summer person because I don't do well in the heat, but springtime, especially before the heat really sets in and before the humidity sets in, is just a wonderful, wondrous time to be outside and to revel in being alive and just able to go do things, even if it's literally just walking around the block. This also is intensely about life, from what I understand, because it is about a child and the sort of cycle of child becoming someday caregiver and in some ways parent to their own parents, especially as the parents age. And I think that's a really important aspect of springtime, is that cyclical nature. I mean, all the seasons are cyclical, but I think spring the most so, because it is the point where we see new life beginning again and unfortunately see a lot of old life moving on, especially in nature. You know, with the melting of the snows, there's a huge loss there. You know, winter is, I think, the most obviously lost season of the year. It's the one that stands out, and spring is not just an adieu to the season, but an adieu to everything that season brings with it. So, late migrations. That's why I think it's a springtime read. On a brighter note, fairy tales are very springy. Whether they're dark fairy tales or bright, cheery fairy tales or something in between, I really associate fairy tales with springtime. And that's why this is a book I haven't read, but this is why I am associating Grim Tales for Young and Old by Philip Pullman with spring. So this is the Penguin Cloth-bound edition. These are original and retellings of fairy tales, I believe. There's not a description in here. Yeah, there's really not. There's a nice long introduction though. But yeah, I think it's sort of retellings and respinnings and reimaginings of classic fairy tales by Philip Pullman. I love the Golden Compass trilogy. Definitely, well, I guess that's not actually, it's Thoth and his Dark Materials, but I love that trilogy, and I would really love to see Philip Pullman's takes on fairy tales. So anyway, fairy tales, I think it's really, really self-explanatory. Fairy tales, springtime, really just tie hand in hand for me. On the sort of fairy tale aspect, we have Hooky. This is volume 1 by Miriam Bonaster-Tur. This is a graphic novel. It's a children's graphic novel. I did read it last year. I loved it. Not going to lie. Total surprise. It is based off the webtoon of the same name, Hooky. And volume 2, they just announced it and revealed the cover, and I'm so excited. Anyway. This is about a pair of twins who basically miss the bus to their magic school and so decide to play hooky. And they go to their aunt and they're like, hey, we're just going to hang out with you. And she's like, okay, fine. And then in the process of living with her, they end up accidentally committing a sort of national crime and have to run away from the law. And a lot of people want them for very different reasons. There's a lot more going on than that. The politics of this book are surprisingly deep, but that's like the heart of it. The characters in this book are the best part, by and far. They're all very precious, but it is a particularly springtime book for me because it really evokes that youth and nostalgia and that, I guess, like elementary school essence that obviously the older you get, you lose because you just have to take on more concerns and more responsibilities. But it really just reminds me of the kind of games I would have liked to have played as a kid, like running around my school playground, running around the forest, running around my backyard or my neighborhood, and pretending I was in the world of Hooky and just doing the things that our characters were doing. There's a lot of just great elements, but a lot of great settings. Let's see if I can get like a decent picture. Because like the art does a good job of like making, oh, here we go, here's a good one. There's like a place they stay for a while. Anyway, the book does a great job of visually showing you, but I feel like it also allows you to just take it further in your head. I'm not a super visual reader, but with help from the actual art here, I was really able to take it far and just picture this world as being huge and these places as being huge. And as a boon, the further I've gotten from this story, the more I've just actually been able to live in and dwell in it. So it's really stuck around really well. And yeah, it just reminds me 100% of the type of game I would want to be playing outside. And springtime is a time when school was ending, when you get even more freedom. So yeah, Hooky. Stories about water and stories about the ocean or the sea or ocean type creatures tend to, for me, fit into summer. But as I was going through my shelves, this one actually grabbed my attention, and that is The Mermaid Chair by Sue Monk Kidd. I haven't read this book. I picked it up because someone recommended it to me. I do really want to read it. Let me read you the back real quick, if I can. I guess there's not really a description in the back of this one. Okay, here we go. There's a little bit of a description. I hope it doesn't spoil anything. I'm going to be really careful because it's like in the back. In her follow-up to the widely acclaimed The Secret Life of Bees, Sue Monk Kidd tells a beautiful and haunting story centered around 42-year-old Jessie Sullivan, a woman in a quiet crisis whose return home to the island of a mermaid saint becomes a pilgrimage to self-awakening. In this powerful exploration of midlife marriage and the intersection of the spiritual and the erotic in the feminine soul, Kidd illustrates the sacredness of belonging to oneself and the healing mercy of love and forgiveness. Jessie's journey begins in the winter of 1988 when she receives an early morning call from her mother, Nell's close friend, Kat. Nell has inexplicably and deliberately severed her own finger, and Kat is calling to ask Jessie to return home to Egret Island, South Carolina, to care for her. Okay, going further feels like it's going to be a spoiler. There's something, again, kind of like Margaret Renkel's book, about becoming a caregiver, stepping into that stage of your life, which I haven't stepped into yet. I'm still quite young. My parents they're not old. They don't need me to be a caregiver, right? But something about stepping into that stage of life feels very springtime, feels very much like a new beginning and a continuation of the cycle. Things that I've been harping on so far in this video, so it kind of feels kind of repetitive. I also think that mermaids, maybe a little bit, are kind of springtime. I don't know if I can take that further, but they feel a little springtime. So springtime and Easter are tied together because I grew up in a Catholic household, even though I'm not a practicing Catholic anymore, and I have a lot of beef with the church. That's always going to be a part of my history in my life, and this book, from what I understand, has a lot to do with Catholicism or has ties to Catholicism. And that's just Easter being such a major Catholic holiday and being a major holiday in my childhood, the toe will always be tied. So yeah, another reason The Mermaid Chair is very springtime for me personally. Okay. Then we have Cersei by Madeline Miller. This is the Illumicrate edition. It is lovely. I'm jealous of it too. Thank you. I actually think that it's still available for purchase online if you wanted to get a copy. I have read Cersei. I loved Cersei. I've read Cersei and Song of Achilles. I liked Song of Achilles. I loved Cersei. It's one of my favorite books. Probably one of my favorites. This book is so important. It is a retelling of a lot of different myths, but it is recounting the life of Cersei, probably most famous for her role in the Odyssey, where she turns Odysseus's men into pigs. But really, this story is not just about humanizing a woman who is viewed as a witch in classic literature, but really about empowering a woman. And springtime is all about power. So March, I believe, is International Women's Month, or International Women's Day is in March, and it's Women's History Month. I might be getting those two confused a little bit, but March is women. Women are for March. March is for women. No men allowed. Obviously joking, but springtime and just female empowerment feel very tied to me. I don't know if I could draw a one-to-one reason why, regardless of March being Women's Month or whatever. There's just something about springtime being a very women power season. Maybe it's because there's so much like motherhood associated with springtime, like motherhood imagery associated with springtime. Possibly. But Cersei, springy book. I also think her cottage and everything, those small moments of her life are very springtime. I love my breathing space in novels, and this one is full of breathing space, and breathing space is springtime. I don't make the rules, that's just how it is. Another book that looks like it's going to have a lot of breathing space, and one that I kind of forgot I had until I was actually at work reshelving this section this book was shelved in, and was like, wait, I have that book. I really want to read that book. That is An Irish Country Doctor by Patrick Taylor. So the back says, An Irish Country Doctor is a charming and engrossing tale that will captivate readers from the very first page and leave them yearning to visit the Irish countryside of days gone by. I already yearn for that. This book doesn't need to make me feel that way. I already yearn for that. Barry Laverty, MB, can barely find the Northern Ireland village of Ballybuckaloo. No. Ballybuckalbo. 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 Can I do an Irish accent? Right. Let's try it in an Irish accent. See if I can do it. Barry Laverty, MB, can barely find the Northern Ireland village of Ballybuckalbo on the map when he first sets out to seek gainful employment there. But Barry jumps at a chance to secure a position as an assistant at a small rural practice. This is so embarrassing. I'm not continuing. It's probably shit anyways. At least until he meets Dr. Fingal Flaherty O'Reilly. The older physician has his own way of doing things. At first, Barry can't decide if the pugnacious O'Reilly is the biggest charlatan he has ever met or the best teacher he could ever hope for. Through O'Reilly, Barry soon gets to know all the village's colorful and endearing residents and a host of other eccentric characters who make every day an education for the inexperienced young doctor. Ballybuckalbo is a long way from Belfast, and Barry is quick to discover that he still has a lot to learn about country life. But with pluck and compassion and only the slightest touch of blarney, he will find out more about life and love than he ever imagined back in medical school. It just sounds so charming. I love country life as an aesthetic. I don't think I would do well living on a farm or in the countryside, but I like to vacation there in my mind. I'm very much a city person, though. The countryside, springtime, absolutely tied together. And just Ireland seems very spring summery of a country I've never been. I would love to visit. Maybe someday. Maybe someday. So then I have a new acquisition. This is The House of Spirits by Isabel Allende. I was going to probably pick this up anyways, but I saw it faced out at work, and I was like, well, that's very enticing. It's magical realism, I believe, and I saw people saying if you loved Encanto and want to read fiction that's similar to Encanto, House of Spirits, 100 Years of Solitude, which I already own, but gives me, for whatever reason, like summer vibes. And there were a couple others mentioned, but The House of Spirits was the one that I recently picked up, and the one that reminds me most of springtime. In general, I think magical realism borders so close to fairy tale that it has that springtime energy to it already. Let me read you the back. The House of Spirits brings to life the triumphs and tragedies of 3 generations of the Trudeau women. The House of Spirits brings to life the triumphs and tragedies of 3 generations of the Trueba family. The patriarch Esteban is a volatile, proud man whose voracious pursuit of political power is tempered only by his love for his delicate wife Clara, a woman with a mystical connection to the spirit world. When their daughter Blanca cannot speak, I'm sorry. When their daughter Blanca embarks on a forbidden love affair in defiance of her implacable father, the result is an unexpected gift to Esteban, his adored granddaughter Alba. This beautiful and strong-willed child will lead her family and her country into a revolutionary future. It sounds really good. Generational stories are something that really draw me, but I've never really dedicated any amount of my time to reading a generational story. I feel like a lot of them are just huge and long, but this one is not huge or long. I mean, it's not tiny, but it's less than 500 pages, so that's kind of alluring to me. This cover, first of all, is very springtime. Lots of... What's that noise? I think it was a weird bird. Okay. This is the cover, and first of all, it has a lot of springtime energy with the flowers, and it's kind of shimmery. I don't know if that comes across, but it's got a little bit of like a shimmer to it, just very barely. It's very pretty, very growth oriented. And this, again, captures that cycle that spring captures so well. The beginning of life, the beginning of a new stage of life. It is messy, right? Springtime is messy. This sounds like it's going to be a little messy, but it sounds like it's going to be beautiful. So it kind of feels like it'll capture the beginning of spring, that mud, the dirt, paw prints everywhere, puddles everywhere, and kind of end with that beautiful, the trees are in bloom, the green is back, the world is vibrant again. Everything is sort of at peace at the end of spring, and it feels like that is going to be the captured vibe of this novel. The next book I pulled is Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey. This book cover does not give spring vibes, does it? It's very winter. But I think the title, Migrations, which means, movement, change, maybe return, place finding. That's very springtime energy. So, what does it say? Franny Stone has always been a wanderer. By following the ocean's tides and the birds that soar above, she can forget the losses that have haunted her life. But when the wild she loves begins to disappear, Franny can no longer wander without a destination. She arrives in remote Greenland with one purpose, to find the world's last flock of Arctic terns and track their final migration. She convinces Ennis Malone, captain of the Sahani, to take her on board, winning over his eccentric crew with promises that the birds will lead them to fish. As the Sahani fights its way south, Franny's dark history begins to unspool. Battered by night terrors, accumulating a pile of unsent letters, and obsessed with pursuing the terns at any cost, Franny is full of secrets. When her quest threatens the safety of the entire crew, Franny must ask herself what she is really running toward and running from. That place finding, that slowly uncovering, like a melting of ice, like a melting of snow, that's very spring. That's very springtime. As I'm sitting here talking to you about like melting and about spring returning, I can literally hear the snow melting off of tree branches and hitting the ground and hitting some metal that is near the ground. And I think that's really poetic and perfect. The last children's book I have on here is The Neverending Story by Michael Ende. This is translated by Ralph Mannheim. I believe originally it is in German. I didn't say who translated House of Spirits. Hold on. That would be Magda Bogen. Or Bogen. Magda Bogen. Neverending Story is a book I've never read, but a movie that got me through so very much in my life. The film, it doesn't start here, but it's very early in the film. Our protagonist, or one of them, his name is Bastian. I had to double check. Bastian basically hides in the school attic, I think, which I never really understood, but he hides there and starts reading this book that he stole. And as he's reading it, he and we are transported to the world of the Neverending Story. Fantastica, that's the name of the world. The movie is so pivotal in my childhood imagination that I picked up the book a couple months ago. I don't know if it made it into any book hauls because not everything I pick up does, but I picked it up because I have full intention of someday actually reading the book that the film is based off of. Particularly though, the part of the film, not like the whole book seems springtime because childhood, nostalgia, going on adventures, that's all very springtime, but the rain and hiding out indoors with a book from the rain, that was my childhood. That was my childhood. Go to the library on a rainy day and sit there and read by the windows, and the rain would come down, and I love that. That is a very particular emotion and a very particular point and place and atmosphere. And I could do that today. Like, I could, if it's raining, go to the library and read. But I don't think I'll ever be able to really capture what it had been like. But I think reading this book, continuing to return to that film, those will get me pretty close. So I have 3 more books for you. 2 that I've read, 1 that I haven't. I'm just going to jump to the one I haven't read so that I can talk about the 2 I have read in a little more depth. So the one I haven't read that I pulled is The Traitor's Kiss. This is a YA fantasy book that I have been wanting to read since it came out. Like, this is the first edition hardcover. I was like, I have to get there right away. It sounds really good. It sounds like it's like epic fantasy set, like set in another world, but like fantasy light all the same. With a quicksilver tongue and an unruly temper, Sage Fowler is not what they'd call a proper lady, which is perfectly fine with her. Deemed unfit for a suitable marriage, Sage is apprenticed to a matchmaker and tasked with wrangling other young ladies to be married off for political alliances. She spies on the girls and on the soldiers escorting them. As their military escort senses a political uprising, Sage is recruited by a handsome soldier to infiltrate the enemy ranks. The more she discovers, the more uncertain she is of whom to trust, and Sage becomes caught in a dangerous balancing act that will determine the fate of her kingdom. It just sounds fun. It sounds light. It sounds a lot like the stuff I was reading in early high school. And again, youth, nostalgia, springtime, all the way for me. Spring is the time for nostalgia. Summer is the time for like heaviness. And autumn is the time for pretentiousness. Let's be honest, autumn is the most pretentious season. And winter is the time for sleep. And that is my favorite season. So, all right, the last 2 books. Like Pride and Prejudice, Assassin's Apprentice is a book that I could argue is perfect for any season. But this is the book in the Farseer trilogy that chronicles the most of Fitz's young life. So we see his life over the course of the whole trilogy, but this jumps, I think, over the most amount of time because he's 5 years old when we're introduced to him as a kid before he's trained to be any sort of assassin or any sort of anyone. There's a lot of time in this book set outside. Again, the outside in springtime. Perfect for each other. It's like it was meant to be. It's like it's natural how that works. There's a lot of time set outside, a lot of childhood vibes. I didn't read this book as a kid, but I would have enjoyed it as a kid. I don't know if I would have gotten everything out of it, but I still would have enjoyed it. Something about how the world of the realm of the Elderlings works that's very self-sufficient, very environmentally handed, very much we use all parts to get what we need, very much a place for everything and everything in its place. All of those for me really scream springtime. Springtime is a time for cleaning out, for reorganizing, for freshening up, and again, finding a place for everything, and everything has a place. So, Assassin's Apprentice, springy. The story itself, though, I think is more of a summer plot. Is that weird to say, like it's a summer plot? And then rounding it all off, a book that also does give me winter vibes, but we're going to go with The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. I love this book. I love this book so much. I read this during the springtime a couple years ago now. I actually listened to an audiobook and the audio narrator was phenomenal. I strongly recommend the audiobook of this one. This is about a girl whose mother goes missing and searching her down thinks it has something to do with this book of fairy tales that her grandmother wrote. Which it does. It does have something to do with the book of fairy tales that her grandmother wrote. The fairy tale aspect, very springtime. We talked about this. The searching for her mother is almost a reverse of that caregiver role. You know, it's almost the darker, edgier aspect. And I think just this book exemplifies finding shade in the springtime. It's not necessarily hot enough outside that you need this shade to feel cool, but sometimes it feels good, and then sometimes it feels like ghosts are running up and down your back. That's this book. This is shade in the springtime. Hazelwood. those are my springtime books. I don't know if I would call them springtime book recommendations because I haven't read most of them, but they are the books that make me think spring. And yeah, there are more on my shelves that I could probably pull and be like, yes, that's a springtime book. But these are the ones that I really, truly get that energy from, if you get what I mean. If you have a springtime book recommendation, please share it. I like I said, I don't love spring. It's not my favorite season. It's my third favorite season, right? It's the bottom half of favorites. But I'm just so excited for spring right now. I'll be excited for spring probably up through March, and then I'll be like, all right, can summer get here? And then summer will be here, and I'll be like, all right, can I enjoy autumn now? And then I'll enjoy autumn. Like, I feel like I'm chasing autumn and then chasing winter, but I'm always excited for spring at the beginning. And I am trying to make the most of it this year. But that is all for me. If you liked this content and you want to see more like it, definitely consider subscribing. And if you're already subscribed, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. It means the absolute world to me to know you're out there and listening and care a little bit at least about what I have to say. Thank you. Hello, and thank you. If you are somewhere cold, I hope you're staying warm. If you're somewhere warm, I hope you're staying comfortable. And most of all, I hope you're reading a great book. I will see you guys next time. Bye!